It was a cloudy afternoon when the five friends, Lucas, Mariana, Peter, Anna, and Rick, finally arrived at the remote old lake. The journey there was tough, with winding roads surrounded by dense forests. The air was heavy and damp, giving the feeling that something invisible had been watching them since they entered the trail. Lucas parked the car near the edge of the lake. The dark water reflected the gray sky, creating an eerie atmosphere. Mariana looked around, feeling a shiver run down her spine. "It's like no one has been here for years," she said, trying to mask her nervousness with a smile. Peter, the most skeptical of the group, laughed. "Oh, these are just stories to scare tourists. Let's set up the camp quickly." As they prepared their things, Anna began to recount the mysterious disappearances she had heard about. "They say that decades ago, people disappeared here without a trace. Fishermen, campers, all gone suddenly. Rick, always the jokester, mocked, 'So, are we going to meet a ghost then?' But his eyes, for a brief moment, showed a hint of unease. The sun began to set, and daylight was slowly swallowed by darkness. The surrounding forest felt more closed and oppressive, and the silence that fell over the lake was almost deafening. Only the occasional sound of a breaking branch far off reminded them they were not alone. When they finished setting up camp, Lucas lit a fire, trying to ward off the chill that was beginning to settle in. The flickering firelight cast dancing shadows around them, making every tree and shrub seem like a threatening figure. Suddenly, a strange noise came from the water. Everyone stopped what they were doing and looked toward the lake. Gentle waves formed on the calm surface, as if something large was moving underwater. "Did you see that?" Mariana asked, her voice trembling. "Probably just a big fish," Peter replied, but even he seemed less certain now. As the night wore on, the feeling of discomfort only grew. Old Lake was alive with dark secrets and mysteries, and the friends had no idea of the nightmare that was about to begin. That night, their arrival at Old Lake marked the start of a terrifying encounter with the unknown, and the sensation of being watched never left them. What they didn't know was that something, or someone, was waiting for them in the dark depths of the lake, ready to claim new victims. With the fire crackling and casting light on the anxious faces of the friends, the night was moving on slowly and menacingly. Every snap in the forest made their hearts race, but they tried to ignore the growing fear, focusing on preparations for fishing. Lucas took out the fishing rods and began setting up the hooks. Mariana helped, her eyes continually scanning the darkness around them. "Let's fish a little before we sleep," he suggested, trying to bring some normality to the tense atmosphere. Peter and Rick were inspecting the inflatable boat. "This should hold until tomorrow. I just hope this fog doesn't get worse," Rick said, looking toward the horizon where a thick mist was beginning to form. Anna, sitting by the fire, was rummaging through backpacks looking for flashlights. "Does anyone else feel like the temperature is dropping fast?" she asked, hugging herself against the chill that seemed to emanate from the lake itself. As Peter inflated the boat, a sense of unease settled over the group. Suddenly, a distant scream echoed through the forest. A human sound agonizing, which made everyone freeze in fear. "Did you hear that?" Lucas's voice was low, almost a whisper, as if he feared speaking loudly might attract whatever was out there. Mariana nodded, her eyes wide with fear. It was a scream, someone calling for help. "Should we investigate?" Peter tried to remain calm, but it was evident he was scared too. "Maybe it's better if we stay together and don't stray from the campsite," Rick said, looking toward the dark, impenetrable forest. They decided to continue with their preparations, but the tension in the air was palpable. The lake seemed to watch their every move like a predator, lying in wait. Every minute, The feeling of being observed grew, and the forest around them seemed too close and more. When they were finally ready to fish, Anna suggested that one person go at a time while the others kept an eye on the camp. "We better take turns. We don't know what might happen if we all leave together." Peter went first, trying to mask his nervousness with jokes as he rowed to a nearby spot on the lake. The water was eerily calm, reflecting the full moon that now shone brightly in the sky. Mariana watched intently, feeling a chill every time a wave broke the silence. The others remained around the fire, their sporadic conversations filled with tension. Suddenly, the silence was broken again, but this time by a sound coming from the water. A soft noise, as if something large was moving just below the surface. "Peter, are you okay out there?" Lucas shouted, trying to keep his voice steady. "Yes, just. I thought I saw something in the water," Peter replied, staring intently at the dark liquid around his boat. What the friends didn't know was that Old Lake harbored far deeper and more terrifying secrets than they could imagine. As they continued with their preparations, a dark force watched and waited for the right moment to strike, turning their fishing trip into an unimaginable night of terror. Night had fully fallen by the time Peter returned to camp. The tension was visible on his face, but he tried not to alarm his friends. "I didn't see anything unusual. Maybe it was just my imagination." Mariana, who had been silent since the distant scream, suggested that everyone rest. "We're going to need energy tomorrow. Besides, this fog is getting thicker. We should stay close to the camp." They set up their tents close to each other, trying to create a sense of security amidst the growing darkness. The full moon illuminated the lake, creating silver reflections on the water's surface, which seemed to move strangely, almost hypnotically. As everyone settled down, a heavy silence took over. The sound of the forest had vanished, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Only the occasional soft waves of the lake broke the silence, creating an even more unsettling environment. Inside his tent, Lucas tried to sleep, but something kept him awake. It felt like a sinister presence was watching. He turned to see that Mariana was also awake, her eyes fixed on the tent's entrance. "You feel it too, don't you?" she whispered, trying not to wake the others. "Yes," he replied. "Something doesn't feel right here." Suddenly, a muffled sound came from the lake. It was as if something large had broken the surface of the water, followed by a deathly silence. Lucas and Mariana looked at each other, their hearts racing. "Should we check it out?" asked Mariana, her voice trembling. Before they could decide, an even more disturbing sound echoed through the night. It was a guttural noise, something none of them had heard before. It seemed to come from the depths of the lake, a low, threatening roar that made everyone come out of their tents. "Did you guys hear that?" Peter asked, his eyes wide with fear. "Yes, it seemed to come from the lake," Rick replied, trying to see through the fog that now covered almost the entire surface of the water. The dense fog created ghostly shapes, and the moonlight seemed to distort the shadows, making everything appear to move. Anna, gripping a flashlight, illuminated the edge of the lake, but saw nothing beyond the fog and dark waters. "Maybe we should stay together around the fire," Anna suggested, her voice laden with apprehension. Agreeing, they all gathered around the fire, seeking comfort in each other's proximity. The warmth of the fire seemed the only real thing in a world that had suddenly become full of uncertainties and fears. Hours passed in tense silence as the friends took turns keeping watch. Every small noise, every movement in the water, made their hearts race. The feeling of being watched never left them, as if something was lurking, waiting for the right moment to act. As the night wore on, the fog came closer, almost swallowing the camp. The palpable terror in the air intensified, and the full moon cast a cold, silvery light on the lake, eerily illuminating the still water. Whatever was out, there knew the friends were defenseless and at its mercy. Then, in the heavy silence, a sudden sound of water breaking echoed once again. This time, it was followed by a scream that froze the friends' blood. Someone or something was out there in the shadows, and they were about to discover that the horrors of Old Lake were far more real and dangerous than any legend. The scream sliced through the night like a knife, making everyone jump to their feet. "Peter!" Lucas yelled, his heart pounding frenetically. They looked around and realized Peter was not among them. "He was here just a second ago," Mariana said, her voice trembling with fear. Without wasting any time, they all ran towards the lake, where the sound of the water breaking still echoed in their minds. The fog was so dense they could barely see a foot in front of them. Rick held a flashlight, sweeping its beam over the water in hopes of finding some sign of Peter. "Here, his fishing rod," Anna shouted, pointing to the edge of the lake. The rod lay discarded on the ground, the line dangling in the water, swaying gently as if something had just let it go. "Peter!" Lucas continued to shout, but there was no response. Just the unsettling sound of the water moving and the distant rustling of leaves in the forest. Mariana began to cry, the feeling of despair overwhelming her. "He can't just have disappeared. We need to find him," Rick said, although the determination in his voice couldn't hide his fear. They decided to split into two groups to cover more ground. Lucas and Mariana went to the left side of the lake, while Anna and Rick went to the right. The fog seemed to close in even more around them, each step feeling like they were venturing deeper into a nightmare. Lucas and Mariana walked in silence, their eyes wide, alert to any sign of movement. "Do you think he fell into the water?" Mariana asked, her voice barely able to come out. "I don't know," Lucas replied, trying to stay calm. "But we can't give up." Suddenly, a sound of water splashing drew their attention. They quickly looked toward the lake and saw a figure moving in the mist. "Peter!" Lucas shouted, but the figure disappeared as quickly as it had appeared, leaving only the soft sound of waves. Meanwhile, Anna and Rick were having their own disturbing experiences. "Did you hear that?" Anna asked, stopping suddenly. Rick nodded, his face pale. A low, continuous murmur seemed to come from the forest, something that was neither animal nor human. "Let's go back," Rick suggested, fear starting to overtake him. "We need to regroup with the others." When the two groups met back at the camp, they were all visibly shaken. "Nothing," Lucas said, frustrated and worried. "We found nothing." Anna nodded. "Neither did we. But we heard things." Panic began to seize the group. Rick, trying to stay calm, suggested they call the police. "We need help. We can't do this alone." They grabbed Lucas's phone but found there was no signal. "Of course, we're in the middle of nowhere," he said, desperate. "What are we going to do?" Before they could decide, a sinister and deep sound came from the lake. They all turned, seeing the water violently agitate. Something big was moving beneath the surface, creating waves that reached the shore. "This isn't normal," Mariana said, gripping Lucas's arm tightly. "We need to get out of here." But before they could move, Rick's flashlight caught something in the water. A hand raised as if someone were drowning, emerged for a brief moment before disappearing into the depths again. "Peter!" Anna screamed, running towards the water, but Lucas grabbed her. "It's not safe," he warned, his eyes filled with terror. The disappearing hand was the last evidence of Peter. The group, now in a state of shock and fear, realized they were facing something far beyond their understanding. Something evil and ancient that was hunting them in the depths of Old Lake. The shock of Peter's disappearance left the group paralyzed for a few moments, but the need to act quickly snapped them out of their stupor. "We need to find him somehow," Lucas said, trying to steady himself. "We can't just leave him out there." They decided to form an impromptu search party, with everyone grabbing flashlights and any tool that might be useful. Anna and Rick began to search around the camp, while Lucas and Mariana headed back to the lake's edge. The fog was denser than ever, turning every step into a struggle against the unknown. The silence was absolute, except for the occasional sound of branches snapping underfoot and the distant murmur of the water. "Peter!" Lucas shouted, his voice echoing into the night with no response. Mariana, by his side, moved the flashlight back and forth, hoping to find some sign of their missing friend. But all they saw were shadows and more shadows, which seemed to dance and distort in the moonlight. Meanwhile, Anna and Rick ventured deeper into the forest, their nerves on edge. "This is madness," Anna said, her voice heavy with fear. "We don't know what's out there." Rick agreed, but continued to scour the area with his flashlight. "If we give up now, we might never find him. We need to at least try." Their search in the forest revealed disturbing signs. They found footprints that seemed to be Peter's, but they ended abruptly at a spot where the ground was churned up, as if something or someone had dragged him away. "This is impossible," Rick muttered, trying to comprehend what could have happened. At the lake, Lucas and Mariana had their own eerie encounter. As they shone their flashlight on the water, they saw something large moving beneath the surface, creating small but constant ripples. "What is that?" Mariana asked, her voice trembling with fear. Lucas squinted, trying to see better. "I don't know, but it looks like it's watching us." They decided to pull away from the water, but before they could take more than a few steps, they heard a terrible sound behind them. It was a low guttural murmur, coming directly from the lake. They turned quickly, but saw nothing but the fog and the dark waters. "We need to get out of here," Lucas said, pulling Mariana by the hand. They ran back to the camp, where they found Anna and Rick already waiting, visibly disturbed by their own findings. "We found Peter's footprints, but they just disappeared," explained Rick, still breathless. "Something took him, and I don't know what." "We need a new plan," Lucas said, trying to remain calm. "Staying here isn't safe. Let's explore the area around during the day and try to get help." The night dragged on, and the group remained awake, feeling increasingly vulnerable. The sensation of being watched never left them, and with every strange sound, their hearts raced. Dawn brought temporary relief, but also a chilling revelation. There were wet footprints around the camp, as if someone or something had walked around during the night, watching them closely. The group knew they were being hunted by something beyond their understanding. Every passing minute increased the urgency to find Peter and leave that cursed place. But Old Lake wasn't going to let them escape so easily, and whatever was in the depths seemed to be just starting its deadly game. With daylight finally breaking, the group felt a bit safer, though the fear still lingered. They decided to explore more of the area around the lake and seek help. But before they could leave, a figure appeared among the trees, walking slowly toward the camp. It was an elderly man, robust in build, with a serious expression and eyes that seemed to have seen indescribable horrors. He approached cautiously, and the group, though wary, felt a glimmer of hope at seeing a human face. "Are you all right?" the man asked, his voice hoarse and grave. "I heard screams during the night. We're looking for our friend," Lucas replied, his voice filled with urgency. "He disappeared last night. Something took him." The man sighed deeply, as if he already knew what had happened. "You shouldn't be here. This lake is a cursed place." Rick, still in shock, looked at the man with despair. "Do you know what's going on? Can you help us?" The man nodded, looking sorrowful. "Come, sit down. I'll tell you what I know, but I can't promise it will bring you solace." They gathered around the extinguished campfire, listening intently as the man began his story. "My name is Raul. I've lived in this forest for over 40 years, and I know the legends about this lake well. They say that long ago, a village existed here. The villagers worshipped an ancient entity, believing it brought them prosperity and protection." Mariana leaned in closer, her eyes wide with interest and fear. "What happened to the village?" Raul looked at the water, as if he could see the ghosts of the past. "One day, something went wrong. The entity turned against them. They say it became a vengeful force, taking all the villagers to the depths of the lake. Since then, anyone who dares fish or camp here is subject to its wrath." Anna, her voice trembling, asked, "But what is this entity? A spirit? A monster? Nobody knows for sure," Raul replied. "Some say it's an ancestral spirit, others believe it's a supernatural creature. But they all agree on one thing: it doesn't allow intruders in its domain." Lucas, determined to better understand the danger they faced, asked, "Is there any way to appease it? To save our friend?" Raul shook his head slowly. "There are no guarantees. Some stories speak of offerings that might appease the entity, but no one knows for sure what it desires. My only advice is for you to get out of here as quickly as possible. The longer you stay, the greater the risk." The revelation of the legend left the group in a state of terror and despair. Raul's story explained the events, but also painted a grim picture of their chances of survival. Peter was in the grip of something ancient and malevolent, and time was running out. With the new knowledge, they decided to formulate a plan. Lucas suggested making an offering, something that might attract the entity's attention while they searched for Peter. Raul offered his help, saying he knew some of the old rituals that could be attempted. As they prepared the offering, the group couldn't shake the feeling they were being watched. The forest around Old Lake seemed alive, breathing, waiting. Whatever lay in the depths wouldn't rest until it had claimed more victims or was somehow appeased. They were about to confront the entity directly, a dark and vengeful force inhabiting Old Lake. Any mistake could be fatal. All they could do now was try, hoping the newly acquired knowledge would be enough to save Peter and their own lives. With Raul guiding them, the group began to prepare the offering. He explained that, according to legends, the entity valued deeply sentimental personal items, something that represented a genuine sacrifice. "You need to offer something that means a lot to you," he said, his voice grave. Each friend dispersed, searching through their belongings for something suitable. Reluctantly, Lucas took out an old pocket watch that belonged to his grandfather, one of the few items he always carried with him. Mariana chose a locket given to her by her mother, containing a small family photo. Anna offered a diary in which she wrote her most intimate thoughts, while Rick chose a hunting knife given by his father, a symbol of their adventures together. Raul prepared a circle of stones near the lake's edge, where the offering would be made. The group gathered around, placing the items in the center. Raul lit a small fire and began chanting in an ancient, unknown language. The flames danced and cast sinister shadows around, enhancing the feeling of being in forbidden territory. "Now we wait," Raul said after finishing the chants. "If the entity accepts the offering, it might return your friend." Silence enveloped the group as they watched the flames. Time seemed to stretch, each minute feeling like an eternity. The fog continued to hover over the lake, creating indistinct and ominous shapes. Suddenly, the fire's flames began to change color, shifting from orange to a spectral green. A cold breeze blew over them, as if something invisible had passed by. Mariana gripped Lucas' hand, feeling the fear rise within her. "Something's happening," Anna whispered, her eyes fixed on the green flames. Then they heard a sound from the water, a gentle bubbling that grew in intensity, as if something large was emerging from the depths. Everyone turned towards the lake, their hearts pounding. A figure began to form in the water. At first, it was just a shadow, but slowly it took the shape of a man. "Peter!" Lucas shouted, running towards the edge. But Raul held him back, preventing him from getting too close. "Wait," Raul said, his voice firm. "We don't know if it's him or something else." The figure continued to emerge, revealing itself more clearly. It was Peter, but his face was pale and his eyes glazed, as if in a trance. He walked slowly toward the shore, moving in a strangely mechanical way. "Peter!" Mariana cried again, tears in her eyes. But Peter didn't respond. He stopped at the lake's edge, staring blankly at the group. Raul approached cautiously. "Peter, are you okay?" he asked, but Peter didn't respond. Instead, he lifted his hand, pointing towards the fire. The group turned to look. The green flames began to dance more intensely, growing in height. Then, from the center of the flames, a figure began to emerge. It was a nebulous shape, indistinct, but it carried an aura of power and malevolence. "It's her," Raul whispered. "The entity." The figure floated above the fire, observing the group with eyes that seemed to pierce their souls. "You have brought offerings," said a voice that seemed to come from all around, a terrifying whisper. "But it is not enough." Panic began to grip the group. "What do you want?" Rick shouted, his voice full of despair. "I want more," the entity replied, its voice reverberating through the air. "I want what is most precious, your souls." Absolute terror took hold of the friends. The entity surrounded them, its presence overwhelming and inevitable. They knew they were at the mercy of a force they couldn't understand or combat. And as Peter's figure remained motionless and empty, they realized that their fight for survival was just beginning. Desperate, the friends tried to think of a way to escape the horror that surrounded them. But Old Lake wouldn't let them go so easily, and the entity demanded its price. The dark, cold depths awaited, and the true nightmare was just beginning. The air around the camp seemed to freeze, each breath of the group turning into vapor in the frigid night. The entity floated above the fire, its words echoing in the terrified minds of the friends. "I want more," the spectral voice repeated, while Peter's figure remained standing, empty and distant. "I want what is most precious, your souls." Lucas looked at the others, the despair reflected in his eyes. "We can't just surrender to this," he whispered, trying to find a spark of courage. "We have to fight." Raul, still near the fire, nodded slowly. "It wants sacrifices," he said, his voice grave. "But maybe we can trick it, at least long enough to escape." "How?" Mariana asked, her voice trembling. "What can we do?" Raul looked at the objects in the fire, still wrapped in the green flames. "We need something more powerful, something that can break its connection to us. We need to find a symbol of purity, something that represents light and hope." But what could that be? Anna questioned, trying to control her panic. Lucas remembered something his grandfather always said. "My grandfather always carried an amulet for protection, something he believed warded off evil. It's in my pocket watch." He ran to the edge, where Peter still stood, and pulled the watch from his pocket. Carefully opening it, he found a small silver amulet in the shape of a cross hidden inside the secret compartment. "Will this work?" Lucas asked, showing the amulet to Raul. Raul took the amulet, examining it closely. "Maybe. The faith and hope it represents might be enough to weaken the entity, at least for a time." The group gathered around the fire again, with Raul holding the amulet in his trembling hand. He began reciting ancient prayers, mixed with the chants he had used earlier. The green flames began to dance even more violently, as if reacting to the presence of the amulet. The entity let out a deafening scream, a sound that seemed to tear the air around them. "No," it roared, its voice full of rage and pain. "You cannot defeat me." Peter's figure trembled, as if he were trying to come back to consciousness. "Peter!" Mariana shouted, seeing a glimmer of life in his eyes. "Come back to us." The amulet began to glow intensely, emitting a pure silver light. The entity recoiled, its nebulous form trembling under the power of the light. "This is not possible," the voice hissed, filled with hatred. "You have paid the price." Raul continued to chant the words of power, his voice growing in intensity. The light from the amulet flooded the area, bathing everything in a serene and purifying glow. The entity let out one last scream of rage before disappearing, leaving only a distant echo in the night. Peter collapsed to his knees at the lake's edge, breathing heavily. "Peter!" the friends yelled, running to help him. He looked at them with eyes full of relief and confusion. "What happened?" he asked, his voice weak. "You were under its control," Lucas explained, helping him to his feet. "But we managed to break the connection." Raul put away the amulet, now dim and lifeless, but still carrying the symbolism of hope and protection. "You're lucky," he said, his voice firm. "But this isn't over. We need to leave before it returns." With Raul's help, the group quickly dismantled the camp, taking only the essentials. Dawn was nearing, and the first light of day began to illuminate the lake, dissipating the sinister fog. As they walked down the trail back, the silence was heavy, but there was a new determination in the hearts of the friends. They had faced the horror of Old Lake and survived, but they knew that the evil still lurked in the depths. Drained and exhausted, the group emerged from the forest into the early morning light, safe for now, but forever changed by their encounter. The air was crisp, a stark contrast to the oppressive atmosphere they had left behind. Raul led them to a distant clearing where they could finally rest and gather their thoughts. "We're not out of the woods yet," Raul warned, still keeping a watchful eye on the direction they had come from. "The entity's power is diminished but not gone. You need to get far away from here and never return." Lucas nodded, grateful for Raul's guidance and wisdom. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "We couldn't have done this without you." Raul gave a small, somber smile. "Remember the lesson you've learned here. Some places are best left undisturbed. Respect the forces of old, and they might just leave you in peace." As they made their way back to civilization, the friends couldn't help but feel an unspoken bond between them, forged through the harrowing ordeal. They knew they had to share their story somehow, not to scare others, but to warn them, to keep them safe. As the sun rose higher, warming their chilled bodies and spirits, they vowed to treasure every day and every moment, never taking their safety and each other's presence for granted. They had crossed paths with an ancient evil and lived to tell the tale, a testament to their resilience and profound friendship. The harrowing memory of Old Lake would stay with them forever, a dark chapter that, despite its terror, taught them invaluable lessons about bravery, sacrifice, and the unyielding power of hope. As they left the lake behind, each of them carried a painful lesson about the cost of the unknown and the power of hope. Raul, with one last look at the treacherous waters, made a silent promise to never let anyone suffer the same fate again. Old Lake returned to its eerie silence, waiting, perhaps, for new unsuspecting souls. But the friends, now more united and aware of the dangers, knew they had escaped something much bigger and older than they could have imagined. With this understanding, they carried with them a newfound wisdom and respect for the mystery that still surrounded that cursed place. The group walked in silence, each lost in thoughts about what they had just faced. The trees around them seemed less threatening in the dawn light, but the weight of what they had lived through still hung in the air. Peter, still weak, leaned on Lucas, silently grateful for his friend's support. Raul led them with firm steps, remaining vigilant for any signs of danger. He knew that although they had managed to temporarily ward off the entity, Old Lake would never be completely safe. "We need to keep moving," he said, breaking the silence. "The further we get, the better." The winding trail seemed longer now, each step echoing in the friends' minds as a reminder of their desperate escape. Mariana occasionally looked back, as if expecting to see the nebulous figure of the entity following them. "Do you think it's really gone?" she asked hesitantly. "I hope so," Raul replied without stopping. "But entities like that are hard to predict. The important thing is that you are alive." Anna, who was carrying a backpack with the few things they had managed to save, asked Raul, "How do you know so much about Old Lake? Have you faced this entity before?" Raul sighed, visibly tired. "My family has lived here for generations. I grew up hearing stories about the lake and its mysteries. When I was young, I was foolish enough to challenge the entity alone. I barely survived. Since then, I've dedicated my life to warning and helping others who venture here." Peter, slowly recovering, looked at Raul with gratitude. "Thank you for saving us. If it weren't for you, I don't know what would have happened." "I did only what was necessary," Raul replied, his eyes fixed on the path ahead. "Now, we need to focus on getting out of here safely." As they continued walking, the forest began to lighten, the first sun rays breaking through the tree canopies. The group felt a wave of relief as they realized they were approaching the edge. The sense of imminent danger started to fade, replaced by a deep exhaustion. Suddenly, a distinct sound broke the silence, the sound of running water. Lucas looked around, confused. "Where is that coming from?" "The lake is behind us." Raul frowned, looking concerned. "There's a river nearby, but it shouldn't be this close. We need to stay alert." Tension grew again as they approached the sound source. Reaching a clearing, they found a small stream running over the rocks. It seemed harmless, but there was something unsettling about the crystal-clear water. Anna, her eyes fixed on the stream, noticed something shiny at the bottom. "Look there," she said, pointing. "It looks like an object." Raul approached cautiously, kneeling beside the stream. He used a branch to poke in the water, revealing an old medallion. "This is one of the offering items." The group looked in shock, realizing the entity still had some control over the area around them. "This is not a good sign," Mariana murmured. "We need to keep moving." They quickened their pace, now aware that the danger was not entirely behind them. The entity's presence, though weakened, could still be felt. The walk seemed endless, but they finally spotted the road that would lead them back to civilization. Reaching the road, the sense of relief was immense. They stopped to catch their breath and reflect on what they had been through. Raul, with a serious look, said, "Remember, Old Lake is never really far away. You were lucky, but others may not be." Peter, still leaning on Lucas, made a vow aloud. "We will never return here, and we'll warn everyone we know about the danger." The group silently agreed, aware that they had survived something many wouldn't. They walked down the road, leaving behind the shadows and secrets of Old Lake. But they knew that somewhere in the depths of the forest, the entity waited, watching, ready to claim new unsuspecting souls. As they distanced themselves from Old Lake, the sun rose on the horizon, casting its golden rays over the tranquil landscape. The feeling of freedom and safety began to settle in their hearts, despite the dark memories still haunting them. Upon reaching the nearest town, they decided to report their experiences to the local authorities, hoping it might prevent others from facing the same fate. Their story was met with skepticism, but also interest, and the authorities promised to investigate further into the mystery of Old Lake. The group went their separate ways in the town, each returning to their normal lives, but all carrying the marks of what they had endured. Peter fully recovered, though he still occasionally had nightmares about his experience at the lake. Lucas, Mariana, Anna, and Rick remained close, strengthened by what they had faced together. As the days passed, the memories of Old Lake became less vivid, but never completely forgotten. Each friend found their own way to deal with the trauma, whether through therapy, mutual support, or simply trying to move forward. The experience left an indelible mark on their lives, teaching them valuable lessons about the danger of the unknown, the strength of friendship, and the importance of never underestimating the power of ancient mysteries. And while Old Lake remained shrouded in shadows and secrets, the group knew they had faced the worst it had to offer and emerged stronger on the other side. With wiser hearts and more resilient spirits, the friends moved forward, determined to live their lives to the fullest, but always aware that some stories never truly end, only chapters that close as new ones begin. And the mystery of Old Lake would remain, waiting for new brave explorers who dared to challenge its dark secrets. If you enjoyed this electrifying adventure and want more content that stirs your emotions and sparks your curiosity, I invite you to subscribe to our channel. By subscribing, you will not only have access to more incredible stories, but also become part of a community that values critical thinking, creativity, and in-depth knowledge of the world's mysteries. Each new subscriber motivates us to create even more fascinating content, and together, we can explore the darkest and most intriguing corners of our imagination. Don't miss the opportunity to stay updated with new adventures and profound reflections. Click to subscribe now and be part of this ongoing journey of discovery and growth. Let's unravel these mysteries together. Your next great adventure starts here.